Do you love books? Do you wish you could hear some insights straight from the author themselves? Join Sam Hankin, your host, as he interviews top-selling book authors and dives into interesting and unforgettable discussions here at The Avid Reader.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of The Avid Reader, brought to you by the Wellington Square Bookshop. Our guest today is Neil Lawrence, author of The Atomic Human, published by Public Affairs last month. Neil's the professor of machine learning at the University of Cambridge, and he's a senior fellow at the Alan Turing Institute and the visiting professor at the University of Sheffield. Hi, Neil. Thanks for coming by today.
Thanks for having me.
I was thinking, the Turing Institute, you're senior fellow. Does the Turing test even have any relevance anymore? I mean, you fooled me that you're human. Maybe I'm fooling you that I'm human. ChatGPT fools me that she's human. What about the Turing test now? What's the deal?
Yeah, it's interesting because for me, I think the Turing test captured the public imagination, but I don't find it super interesting. I think he was trying to prove something different from what people he was trying to prove. I don't talk about it too much in the book because I think that in some sense, oddly, the book, I never say this, but in the book, I think one thing I'm trying to sort of show is actually the Turing test. It's not about, from I think Turing's perspective, it's not showing that machines can think or that machines are like human. He's trying to create a sort of thing that avoids the question. And I think it then became, for other people, it's more like what society thinks the Turing test is, perhaps than what Turing thought it was. And I think in some sense, my book is a refutation of that form of test, that actually just because something can appear to you to be human under certain conditions, that doesn't mean there's no difference between it and the human, which is sort of odd thought.
Not to jump right into it, but, you don't even say in your book, since because of the way technology is, I can see how many times you've used each word. And it's wonderful that you use the word imagination 57 times and butterfly 41 times. It means it's a good book. But you only use AGI. You don't use AGI. You say artificial general intelligence one time and one time only. And when you're comparing Altman and those guys, I don't mean to say it this way, kind of to Nazis.
Well, yeah, it's like when I'm sort of comparing it to, because it is a eugenic concept. The notion of general intelligence is a eugenic concept.
I know you believe. When I was talking to Eliza 20 years ago, here's where it comes out. I'm talking to Eliza. I'm thinking, oh, she's saying, yes, that's interesting. Go on. And I said, well, I enjoy talking to you about this. Tell me more. And I was thinking, yes, that seems like I'm talking to a human being. And now, just like when you were doing the talk, the Google Talks guy, he's saying this. You kept talking about this is transformative. It's a metamorphosis. How much things have changed. But what does that actually mean? What are we transforming into? What's changing? Why are you popular at parties now?
Because I think for the first time, this technology is making computers it possible for a regular human to communicate what's in their head to a computer, which is a really extraordinary thing. It doesn't make the computer a human being. It doesn't make it an artificial general intelligence or a super intelligence. It's just an extraordinary thing that regular people can now talk to a computer. And in some sense, and the book tries to talk about this, what that sense is, the meaning of that human can be communicated in terms of the computer. It's possible that the computer, I use the word butterfly a lot because another word I avoid is consciousness. I think it appears only once because I think that means different things to different people. And so actually I'm using a lot of the time I'm using butterfly to refer to things that some people might talk about as consciousness.
Well, why don't we get right to it and talk about the book, which was so poignant, Diving Bell, Butterfly, and talk about, the French editor of Vogue magazine. Why don't you tell the story?
Yeah, so he suffered a stroke in, I think, 1995 and became locked in. And that story it was turned into a film, the Diving Bell and the Butterfly. And a lot of the film, I think, focused on his former life and then his life after being locked in. But the book talks a lot about what he feels like to be in this state. And he has this analogy that physically he feels like he's locked in. The French is the diving suit, which I think is better. I don't know why they translated the title, but it's translated to diving bell, because the notion of the diving suit is he can tug on the breathing cord, I guess, to communicate, because the only way he can communicate is by winking. And then he says, though, but he feels like a butterfly, with the butterfly being his ability to imagine and remember, and that feels free. It's really close to like what we think of as Cartesian duality, or concepts like that are quite common, or people's sense that there's a spiritual self and a material self, or people's feeling of their consciousness or their ability to dream and imagine going forward. So I kind of like that duality. And one of the points the book makes is that we're all fascinated by that. And one reason we're perhaps fascinated by that, because as a locked-in individual, he has all this ability to think and so little ability to share. But the point then I try and make in the book is, yeah, that's also our state as human beings. Even though we can communicate, I estimate, about 300 times faster than Jean-Dominique Bauby, relative to the machine, which can communicate, depending on which figures you use, but 300 million times faster than us. We're in the same state as this gentleman. That's the state of our intelligence. That's its context. And for me, that realization explains a lot about how our intelligence operates, and how it's different from the machine, which just doesn't have this constraint. And I think it's like a lot of things. And actually, it goes back to, I think something my brother, who was much more artistic than I am, I think once said to me, but I'm sure, he picked it up somewhere else, but I always associate it with him, is, the beauty of art is how it responds to constraints. If you have, one of the problems with buildings made of reinforced concrete is they kind of do anything because the material is so strong. So it no longer looks special to do those things because you've removed these constraints. And I think that's a lot of the beauty of human intelligence. It's like, because of this bandwidth constraint, that it's amazing. But, it's like the whole absurdity that it's somehow rankable, or that, I find the whole conversation around AGI absurd. Machines have been way better at us in many, many ways already for many, many years. The thing they can't be better at us at doing is being human beings. It's like that sometimes I joke about, well, what does the artificial general horse look like? It's better than a horse. Yes. in all horse-like ways. It simultaneously produces more manure and less manure, depending on whether you use your horse for fertilizing your roses or you use your horse for riding. It's an absurd thing. A horse is a horse. And there are different concepts of horse. They're not sort of all rankable without saying what you're using the horse for. Are you using it as a pit pony? Is it for horse racing? Is it to comfort a disabled child? I don't know. It depends.
The thing about your book, and I sincerely do not mean this as a compliment, because I hate compliments. It's like a really, really good book, because as you're talking, I'd written down 10 questions. The ones I didn't write down, I've already forgotten. I already thought of ant general intelligence. What's the best vehicle? The end of software engineers. These are all going through my head. How the hell could you write a book so good that I'm constantly thinking with specific concepts like Schrodinger's bridge? No, okay, I have to just pick one, right? I can't do them all. So, okay, one of my favorite ones is we'll just keep going off these ways. One of my favorite ones is, and everyone thinks Mike Tyson is dumb. I think Mike Tyson is one of the smartest people I've ever listened to.
Yeah.
First of all, he has an incredible knowledge of the history and sport of boxing and the physics of it. But he said, as you say in the book, he said, a plan is only good until you get hit in the mouth. And the general who said, the only plan you can have in battle is the very first thing you do, which goes to Schrodinger's bridge. But okay, I don't. There's no question. But it's fascinating,
and it's the human state, because however remarkable our brain and however remarkable we make our machines, the world is orders of magnitude more complex than that. And these notions we have about futures where the machine has worked it all out, it's just ridiculous. Errors will always be made. So what's what's remarkable about our intelligence is more how we're coping with those errors and how we cope with our plans not working out. I mean, I think I can't remember the way I put it, but one of the concepts I really tried to express is that's another part of the human condition, that we're sort of cursed. And for me, it's most expressed by this William Blake painting, which if I had images in the book, I'd have had like probably 4, and they would have been the Sistine Chapel creation of Adam, which is everyone, like it's everywhere. It's too like used. Then it would have been Blake's Newton, and then it would be in Sistine Chapel, the fall, so the casting out of Adam and Eve, and then it would have been Blake's the Elohim creating Adam. Because when Blake has his image of the creation of Adam, there's this whole look, the look on the face of Adam is the same as the look on the face of Adam when he's cast out of the Garden of Eden in Michelangelo's depiction. And that's because Blake believed, I think, I'm not a deep expert on Blake, but he believed that the moment where we lost sort of bliss was not when we were cast out of the Garden of Eden. It was when we were made physical. So in other words, he's sort of saying this constraint that is on us, our bodily form, is the thing that brings frustration. And that's the Mike Tyson getting punched in the mouth thing that we dream, we imagine, we believe, we hope, but then circumstances mess with us. But what's so beautiful is that even though you can sort of look at us and say, well, actually, we're not very good at predicting when things will work out, we retain this optimism to go again. So we go again. So Tyson's right, we get punched in the mouth, but we go again. And that is another beautiful thing about the human condition. And I think it's associated with this difficulty of actually predicting future circumstances. And what's offensive about AI is they're claiming, that the machine could do this. No, it can't. And not only will it not be able to, when it makes errors, it will make errors that are not of our origin, that are errors that cause us different types of problems that we can't assimilate in our society. So it cannot be allowed to make these consequential decisions on its own. It can certainly support us and work with us, but it cannot be just left to blunder about the place without this sort of sense of humanity that each of us individually feels.
It's interesting because, going back to Elon Musk, he said that college is low bandwidth. And it is because, Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, they run the world, their companies run the world. They didn't go to college because they don't have time for college. They didn't have time for that because, my daughter is getting her master's degree, but her professor's talking about the fact that she called Verizon and they didn't show up to fix her phones. You don't have time for that. You came there to do a specific thing, and you generally don't get that. You can get it very easily by simply asking ChatGPT the questions that the teacher should be asking and answering, but it's this low band. And the thing is, it's our flaws and foibles that you kind of say make us who we are, because that's how natural selection works rather than the selection process that would be done by computers. And it's the idea of the errors that we make that make us who we are. And the last thing before I let you go is, you go forward, is the other aspect I always think of is, should a man's reach exceed his grasp, or what's a heaven for? Because it's like humans strive for the divine, knowing that we can't achieve it. So like we're climbing a mountain, you can get to the next handhold, but you can touch it, but you can't grasp it, but you're there, it's there. Like you're saying.
Which I think is the extraordinary thing about the collaboratively together, we reach further than any of us can individually. And when we look at sure, fair enough, Elon Musk, I think Peter Thiel is a big advocate of not going to university, Bill Gates. Ironically, I think they're all copying Bill Gates. I mean, Bill Gates dropped out of university because he had an operational business with a bloody customer. I think it's the Altair basic, right? And one of the things that's weird about these other, everyone else is now dropping out to template match Bill Gates. Oh, Bill Gates dropped out. They don't have customers. They just have VC funding. Gates didn't get VC funding, in the same way. That came later, right? It's a totally different world when Bill Gates drops out of college. It's now become almost like it's the hero narrative that the first thing you do is drop out of college. Well, these are people in a rush, right? But let's face it, the only reason they can achieve any of these things is because there's a cultural infrastructure, a scaffolding around them that in their case involves venture capital. It involves the people who did it before being willing to invest in people who come afterwards, and a very refined, specialized system of delivery, which works particularly well with software at scale. But that is just one piece of our culture. And to some extent, it's becoming a cancerous piece of our culture because it's observing all attention. Because these people, what solutions have they ever delivered that are matching the problems people say they have? Because people don't go around saying, hey, I really need a lame interface that makes me jealous about what my friends are doing. They don't. They say, I would really like to have better social care for my elderly relative, or I'm really worried about the education of my kids, or I'm really worried about security and crime being reduced in my area. Whatever they care about. The problems they care about are hard to solve. They're hard to solve. And ironically, they are left to an organization, which certainly in the United States, everyone thinks is the last place that should try and solve problems, which is government, right? They're so-called wicked problems. So it's fine. It's great. These are amazing achievements. And I try and really capture in the book that these are extraordinary things that these people do, and they're extraordinary personalities, but they're one segment of society. And an important segment. I mean, unfortunately, as I talk about it in the book, the modern information topography, they're coming to dominate society in a way that is extremely damaging, because that segment of society is convening around very tangible, measurable achievement, which is certainly part of humans and something that I think we all seek. What I think of the type of achievement that gives you a dopamine hit. But that's not all of human achievement. There's a lot of stuff going on around, art, music, literature, the cultural thing. At this point, I try and get across about one of the ways that we collaborate is around shared ideals that are more sophisticated than any of us. And that can lift our thinking. And those ideas are often more nuanced than you can sort of capture in a business pitch to a bunch of Silicon Valley people.
Two things, interesting. You can't ignore them because it is happening. And the second thing is both Sam Altman and Elon Musk are telling us that what they're doing will destroy humanity. That's the strangest thing I've ever seen. Both of them are saying, what I'm doing will kill us all.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird though, because I think their understanding of society is so poor. I mean, they're highly intelligent people, but their social capabilities are really lacking. And that's sort of, it's characteristic of, and that's what I think, for me, that's why I love Newton by Blake, because it shows an individual who's utterly focused on a simple picture in front of them. And Newton, of course, did extremely impressive things. But his intelligence is a focused intelligence. It's not one that is taking in broader context and a broader understanding and nuanced views. And of course, Silicon Valley itself selects for people who have focused intelligences, because that's the sort of person that is going to dedicate themselves to an idea that, in all probability won't work out. You need this fanatical dedication to run a successful startup. So the whole ecosystem selects for that form of intelligence. And of course, and then they all gather together and then they think, oh, we're all successful. This must be what intelligence is. But they're successful as a byproduct of wider society. And, and impressive though they are, the thing that they miss is they have no idea how society works. They certainly have ideas of how to intervene and manipulate society, but they don't understand how the more sophisticated areas of society like justice and democracy are operating.
Well, on the most basic level, then, should you say that, okay, ostriches have done really well. Why don't we all, while they do this, why don't we just act as ostriches, because we'll be okay?
Well, and that's the problem. because that where we fundamentally get undermined. And this isn't, the things that they talk about are just absurd technical existential risks of killer AIs. I mean, they're just absurd nonsenses. The actual risk is
people
the risk that we all become
There's
like
lots of
them.
people who disagree with what you're saying.
Yeah, but it's, even on there's lots of people who disagree, but the point is that, like, to get to the place that they're talking about, where some AI has all this power, that it's allowed to make consequential decisions, and it's automating, it's like untrammeled in terms of it's just allowed to do that. How did we get there? Well, the only way is that we handed that power over to private companies, and then those private companies internally handed it over to automated decision making. Well, that's happened already. That's exactly what's going on with Facebook and the news that they're pushing in front of us, or Twitter, or any of these social media. To the extent it's going to happen, that's the situation we're facing. That's the societal existential threat we are currently looking at. It doesn't have to get any worse. It doesn't require a super intelligence. It's already algorithmic decision making being centralized and governed by very few entities who have immense power in society. So we're there.
But 20 years ago, and when you did the Google talk with Zubin, you're there. You are back there. You opened the book talking about Meta and the conference and what was going to happen and what did happen. You're part of the beginning of all this.
Yeah, and you're sort of looking at it going, oh my God, these people are naive. This is going to be bad. And so you're watching that happen. But and interestingly, the same thing happened back then. That back in 2014 or whatever else, when this stuff's kicking off, I'm trying to warn about, and I've got a series of Guardian articles, what I refer to as the digital oligarchy, what we're experiencing now, which is going to turn into a form of digital tyranny, with the people who were warning about threats being right at the heart of that. And in an unknowing way, they're not even trying to achieve it. They're just a product of the system. That's one of the other problems. You take Sam Altman out, Mark Zuckerberg out, Elon Musk out, someone else substitutes, right? There's a million people with that naivety and that level of intelligence.
No. You can take Trump out too, because times make the man. It's what? And
I think that this is a really important point, and something that deeply disturbs me when I hear people talking about the current situation we're in, as if this is just about individuals. No, these are about individuals who are made by the times around them. I mean, of course, they vary in how they're reacting and how they're responding to it. But you don't need, let's highlight, none of this involves, sort of super intelligences. This involves regular people with an enormous amount of power, a lot of that being devolved to systems that don't take into account human context, right? So the threat we face, before you get to any point where there's a technical existential threat, where you've somehow got into society, where you've integrated these systems in our daily lives to such an extent where they could wield the power that we're being warned about. No, that on the road there, you've destroyed everything we care about. Because how did you get there without utterly undermining the open society? I mean, think particularly things we care about in the West. I mean, that's kind of why the book ends talking about Karl Popper. That's why the book ends referring back to what people fought for in the Second World War and how easily they're seeing them.
Stop for 1 second, because we're talking about times make the man. I love, because I share your passion about, it's not like the greatest generation thing, but there's these people who died for causes they're being forgotten. And you talk in your book about Eisenhower, and you talk on YouTube, and you should watch the YouTube videos about this idea that, D-Day is this incredibly calculated risk and random walk and rely totally on weather, unbeknownst to anybody. But in World War II, we're talking about Musk and Trump and Gates and Peter Thiel, very evil creature, and J.D. Vance, very, very evil creature. But shit, I shouldn't do this. But in World War II, it was this cult of personality, because without Stalin, without Roosevelt, without Hitler, without Churchill, those four people actually were the difference, in my opinion. Why is that different than what's happening now? Those four people.
I mean, it's hard, isn't it, right? Because we, as humans, we love to communicate in narratives. And one of the things I love about exploring these stories is how the narratives expand into these trees of things that went on. And, I think not every reader appreciates it, but I think you see my love of that process in the book, the sort of digressions and the sort of, oh, hang on, it looks like this. Oh, but wait a second, there's this other thing going on. There's these multiple strands. The world is so complicated.
That's the story of my day. My day starts, here's how my day starts. I get up and I go, what the hell is this? That's the first thing I think every morning. What is this? What am I in?
Yeah.
I'm 72 years old. That's what I start out with. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, and I just love that. And it's kind of my response to the quote I have is the Winnie the Pooh quote, being a bear of little brain, because I think that's associated. That's the problem. That's what leads to what I think of as Tyson's maxim. We get punched in the mouth because we're all bears of little brain. We can't work out the complexity of the world around us, and constantly it throws something at us. But then the converse of that, and I think, and not everyone's blessed with this curiosity and this interest, is that as you go deeper into any story, it has this sort of fractal nature. The deeper you go, the more complexity you find, the more nuanced everything becomes. So maybe at one level, I mean, these are incredibly significant people, but, I really try and temper at the end of the book with that Popper quote about great men, because one of the highlight or the prologue of Popper's Open Society and Its Enemies is that we get obsessed with these great, I mean, they were all men then, but the sort of, and the great men hero narrative, which is right at the heart of these Silicon Valley stories, right? And it's a narrative that is right at the heart of Greek myth, right? And it's a sort of it's an interesting narrative. It's one we can all get behind, but it's clearly not true. And there's much more nuanced narratives in terms of how communities operate and how people, and I think that actually if you go, and I don't know all the details of Gilgamesh, but through the book, I really wanted to find out about older writing, and I was lucky enough to have a colleague who researches it. And the Epic of Gilgamesh, the first piece of that epic is a hero narrative of someone who goes and destroys the cedar forest, kills the animistic guardian of the forest. And for the rest of his stories, he's being hounded by that evil about what he did. So there's this really, in these very old myths before writing, there seems to be this much more sophisticated quality of story where there's this tension between what the hero's doing and the destruction of the environment. And, and it was a destruction of the environment because it's quite plausible that the reason why, I mean, I don't know, this is another simplistic narrative, those Mesopotamian cities ended up not existing is because their environment couldn't take this constant presence of humans cutting down forests that were some distance away from the stories, and it undermined the ecosystems, and the rivers became silted up or their, the land that had been fertile got covered in salt. I don't know what the latest thinking is. It's going to be a nuanced thinking. But I think, I use those narratives because I think that they draw people in. I'm also a bit skeptical about this idea that it's I mean, to some extent, yeah, it is. Like, but I think that, and maybe that's the point you're making, is that the moments make these people. So these people are made by their time. If Hitler hadn't come to power, then Churchill would be no one we talk about, right?
We can stay in the same era, and we can talk about the man whose shoulders you stand upon. So you're standing upon the shoulders of Alan Turing.
Yeah.
Did he make our world what it was simply because he utilized the beginnings of artificial intelligence in order to save the world? I mean, did he save the world? And then look at his drama, look at his tragedy, going back to Gilgamesh.
And the people around him. So actually the main story I tell is the story, I mean, and Turing's involved, but the story of Colossus, which involves people like Tommy Flowers, who aren't often spoken about. But we like to compress it in Turing. And Turing himself is a fascinating character. And it's someone very much in this Newton mold. So
yeah,
as I try and communicate at some point, it's like, well, yeah, he's an absolutely brilliant person. He's not very good at social intelligence. I mean, and this is, these stories are running through the book in some sense, because I'm trying to communicate that this is a multifaceted, complex thing. I can admire Turing. I can disagree with some of his ideas and sort of think, oh yeah, there's certain situations where I wouldn't really want Turing to be representing me. Yeah, he can write a letter to Churchill, and he can, I mean, we don't tell this story in the book, but it's certainly a story that he's one of the signatories of a letter to Churchill that prioritizes the materials and resource that they need to basically provide the, intelligence in all senses of the word center of the war effort. But Turing, he's an absolutely extraordinary key figure. But one of the interesting things, and I again try and communicate this in the book, his dreams and visions that he has about the computer after leaving Bletchley Park, when he loses that need to deliver a solution that's going to save lives in the Atlantic tomorrow, they become as speculative as William Blake's. And William Blake was considered crazy in his time. But, in 1946, I think, when I'm quoting this letter from Turing, where he actually predicts the future of what we are doing today, the idea that he could have built that in his time is ridiculous. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. It's as ridiculous as Blake's ideas for, separate thing on Blake, but he was interested in child labor and women's equality. He was
Leonardo's.
Yeah, these things are, in some sense, these ideas are out of whack in their time. They're never going to be made. So these are sort of visionary, but they're visionary in retrospect. I mean, other people had visionary ideas that we don't talk about, and Blake would have had ideas that, don't map out or don't pan out. I think he believed that Jesus Christ walked around England or something, things like that. So we don't tend to talk about that as much. And, Turing's like that as well. But so there's this, and that's the retrospective nature of narrative, isn't it? We look back and we want to tell the hero narrative as the story, as if someone did these things, when in reality, it was much more complicated and much more interesting. The book tries to capture that while plugging in to our need for narrative. And I know that some readers sort of maybe find that distracting, because I guess the game that you're trying to play is to tell the sort of boy's own story, but then at the right moment to say, yeah, but it wasn't quite like that. And there was this other thing going on. And I think that's difficult.
You must have really enjoyed doing the audiobook.
I loved it. I just totally... There was only one day, right? So I foolishly agreed to do it. It was across, I think, 4 days, 4.5 days. So it's like within a week. And I think Wednesday night, I foolishly agreed to do an evening thing. I got back late and I was tired. And when I was reading, I don't know if this, this certainly happens to me sometimes when I'm giving talks, if I'm too tired. You get like almost like a counter narrative in your voice, in your head. So it's just like something along the lines of, no one cares about this. Why have you written all this? Where are you going with this? And I don't know, and I can't quite tell whether it was too much in that section of the book, that I'd really got carried away with these narratives and these sort of things, whether I'd just gone, or it was just that I was reading tired. But the reason I mentioned that, because it was the only moment. I'm not saying, it doesn't mean, it just means I'm a narcissist, but I loved reading it and I insisted on doing it because there were words, even if I'm not a great voice actor, there were words and things I wanted to say that had to be in my voice, that had to come from me.
Because you're passionate about it. But if you say you're a narcissist, you're not a narcissist, so don't worry about that. All right, we'll never get anywhere this way. Let's go back to showers in America.
Yeah, it's not in the book, but it's something I was thinking about while doing the US tour. This sort of thing that we're seeing where these leaders, these amazing people, they are amazing in many ways. Whether they cause damage, I don't like to think of them as evil in any sense. I think they're a product of society, and I'm not sure that, but I'm not sure personally I believe in evil. So, maybe that's an odd position. But these extraordinary people, they are, one of the things they're saying is that no one can understand this technology and that it must be down to them to control it because this is beyond the understanding of individuals. And this is just such a pile of rubbish. And what they mean, they don't understand. It's true that none of them are technical experts in this stuff. And to the extent that they listen to people who agree with their opinion on it, right? So first of all, I would say, yes, it's absolutely true that none of the people who were saying that understand this technology. And there's also large pieces of this technology that we're still trying to understand how it's operating, just like the steam engine was developed before we understood entropy. And there's still things about fire and flames and turbulence of flames that we don't understand, like how to optimize numerically a Formula One engine. The world is still more complicated than we can model when it comes to the flame front entering the engine of a car. So at that level, yeah, sure, we don't understand. But that's not, if you're driving your car, you're not sitting there thinking like, oh, well, I can't possibly drive this car because no one actually understands the way the flame front is propagating in the top of the cylinder head and why twin sparks in this configuration is working out. I mean, in effect, that's what we're being told. What we know is that, like, if we steer the car in certain directions, if we turn the wheel, if we press the brake pedal, we go through driver ed, we understand the car. We also understand.
You haven't explained the shower. You have to explain the shower.
Yes, yeah, you're right. A terrible digressor. This is like the book's all like this as well. So I'll come back to the shower in a moment. But so I've often had this thought that, like, the real problem here is you're not engaging with people. You're not giving them products they want. You're not teaching them how to use products. So if AI or digital software in general was as useful to people as cars were, that would be great. So the shower example was traveling around the US. I always get confused. Like, for some reason, you people have decided to go for this. And I don't know if you do it domestically in households. When I stay with friends, there's two taps sometimes, but the modern hotels, they like this one knob that you spin it around and it simultaneously increases temperature and flow rate. And okay, I actually work out the operating point that I want to use this knob on, but it always takes me a while to work out what I'm doing.
Well, it's usually counterintuitive. It's also counterintuitive purposefully, I think. What I like is I like to go to London. I have hot and cold knobs with a circular piece of enamel that says H and a circular piece of enamel that says C. And it has 4 little arms, and you turn them that way and you turn them that way. I like light switches so you go on and off rather than press a button and watch 4 little green lights go down.
And you're like,
I don't
get light switches in the US in general, like even domestically. I never understand why they're located where they are. In Europe, they're normally by the entrance to the room, right? In the US, you'd find them anywhere, like randomly distributed. But a lot of this is about, it's not that I don't understand. The point is, it's not I don't understand how a shower is working. I understand pretty well the functioning of a shower and even how hotels manage to have showers that provide hot water very quickly, right? Yes. They pump hot water around the hotel. But I can't work out how to get this thing that I'm not going to get a douse of cold water when I step in. So it's to do with the user interface, right? And actually, when it comes to these technologies, that's why the analogy is there, is that we would like technologies that people don't have to understand, like, how the flame front's propagating, the equivalent of that in the neural network. What they want to understand is, what do I have to do to make this thing do the thing that I want it to do? I mean, that's what a tool should be responding. And it's just a big problem with digital technologies is they somehow don't operate like that. And I think this goes all the way back to this Samuel Butler quote from the 19th century, where the tools feel like they're enslaving us because we have to do all this stuff for them. And yet the benefits from the stuff we're doing don't seem to accrue with us.
It's like a USB-A plug that, notwithstanding the fact there's a 50-50 chance you're going to put it in the right way, you put it in the wrong way 95% of the time. Thank God USB-A is gone. But isn't it true? I mean, and you talk, now we have to go to anthrops. I anthropomorphize the USB-A. I know that it is trying to deceive me. I know that it hates me. I know that it's attempting to waste the time of my life, or if I have something important to do, I know I will not be able to insert it correctly. And the guy who invented it said, I'm sorry, I made a big mistake. I should have made it in the center.
Yeah. I think that, and they call it Walter handles, I think. Then I think that the Walter handle idea is really key here because it's a sort of design issue. And I think the challenge with AI, and this is why there's so much stuff in there about flight and the work of Bob Gilruth in trying to characterize how a plane should respond. Because what I'm trying to communicate there is that when Armstrong's landing on the moon, he's not actually directly flying that capsule anymore. He's working with a computer to fly it, but he's inputting on a control stick, which is giving him an analogy of, like, I think he flew Sabres in the Korean War or something like that, where he was directly connected to the wings through hydraulics or whatever it is. So the analogy is kind of key. And what a lot of what they did at NACA, the National Advisory Committee on Aeronautics, is they ended up sort of trying to work out how you make the plane respond in such a way that feels natural for the pilot. And once they characterized that, they were able to translate that into how do you control a rocket where you're not actually, with the rocket, you're not actually directly controlling the thrusters. You're controlling it with the aid of a computer. And what I'm trying to get across there is that we need the equivalent with this, what I think of as the human analog machine, because what the computer's doing is it's not genuine human intelligence. It's presenting us with an analogy of a human. And that analogy of the human is the thing that we need to characterize, because that interface between us having a conversation with the computer is the sort of, like, as I think of it, Kahneman would say slow thinking, but I would say slow reacting, but it's also fast reacting. It's the equivalent of the conversation that we're having is the equivalent of a human flying a plane, but it's just happening slower and reaching a higher intelligence. And the nature of that interaction is just not well characterized. How it is that, for example, people like Donald Trump can draw people in by using language in these particular ways. And it seems foolish to a lot of people, but in some ways can be seen as highly socially intelligent. Not a sort of social intelligence that would work well in a group of 35 people, but a type of social intelligence that manifests very well across Twitter or television, in the current environment. And, we don't even understand how that's working, like how that's triggering people in different ways. And this is where the real dangers come, is that, we're at risk of creating machines that can emulate that before we've understood that that's even happening. And we know that's a risk because that already happened with social media. That already happened, not with machines that were conversing with us, but were just sharing things with us that plug into our prejudices, that feed our prejudices and cause divisions in society.
When you talk about the analogy, well, we could get into the fact, how in God's name did we land 12 people on the moon 55 years ago using something that had this much power and doing all of them safely? And how can you not become a conspiracy theorist and say, there's no way in God's name that we actually did that, when we can't get above 200 miles other than Elon Musk? Now, 50, all right, I'm not even going to do it. Never, sorry. But I was going to say this. So it always goes back to Douglas Hofstadter for me. I mean, you're talking about analogies. Gödel Escherbach, everything he's written since then is basically everything we do is metaphor. There's nothing we do that isn't metaphor. But does AI metamorphosize itself? No, it doesn't. It actually just gives you back exactly what it is. We don't. I don't give you back what I am. You don't give me back what you are. Everything
well, it's actually giving a reflection of what we are now.
Well, that's that AI mirror lady.
Yeah, Shannon Valoy. I mean, actually, I try and get this across, although what I sort of say, so I have it in there a bit. And actually, for me, it goes all the way. Oh, got one of my favorites here, Conrad Lawrence, Behind the Mirror. Yeah. So this is 1970. So I refer to Conrad Lawrence a lot in the book. And I haven't read Shannon's book yet, actually, but my understanding, I have got it. It's it's all the way up there. Look,
well, the reason I got
one.
you. Yeah.
So, and I think the interesting thing, and so I don't know if she's exactly.
Stop. We can't. You won't stop, because it's all interesting. But I wanted to just tell you, the reason I got you as the interview is because the PLS, Times Literary Supplements, like every week there's 4 AI books, and then if you go to the New York Times book review, and I get all of them because it's amazing. But yeah, you must have great times at parties. Everyone's in love with you now, everywhere. The stock market.
Well, I don't know, because I think they're in love for the wrong reasons, aren't they? It's sort of like when you work out that the reason why someone likes you is not who you really are. It's like It's what a public perception of you. It's like someone's fallen in love with some part that you play in a film rather than what you actually are. And then it's very, very hard to sort of, it's almost like you've been typecast. Your technology's been typecast. And then you sort of see that, like, so I certainly see that in reactions to my book. There's some people who are picking it up. They're wanting. There was a nice review in Nature that sort of 4 books, and it's quite quick, but it sort of said, I think it's probably captured quite well. It says, fascinating but demanding. Well, it wasn't my intention, like, to write a demanding book, but I think it's a book you have to intellectually engage with. If you're expecting to get a load of like sound bites about AI and that you can just quickly read, like when you're on, no, tough. You have to actually engage with it. And there's a number of people who, it's very clear, have not engaged with it because they kind of think they know it already, or they kind of, I don't know, there's something weird about that. And
no, your book. I mean, I do this. It's not a living because I'm not making any money, but I do this for a living, and I have 2 bookstores, and I read. And again, it's not because I'm trying to be nice to you. It's just that your book is impossible not to engage with, and I can't explain why. It's just that when you turn the page, there's another guy saying something that, wow, okay. It's like that. It's like you were doing with your interior monologue when you were doing your reading. It's like, I don't think anyone's really going to read this. Am I doing the right thing? But in the opposite sense, I'm looking at him going, oh, I had no idea. Yeah, this is really cool. And, you know.
It tries to use, I mean, I don't know. It's really, I mean, it's my best attempt. I mean, it's really nice to hear that because it really was my best attempt to do that. And principally because I'm kind of deeply worried about the quality of the conversation because it's being led by, like, whatever the skills of, and I do, to be honest, whatever I think of, I mean, I'm avidly watching SpaceX stuff. It's just totally extraordinary what they're doing.
He's catching a 21-story building. How do you do that?
And what actually shocks me in some sense is that the complexity of this person and what's going on isn't really captured in any media or mainstream. I mean, I think some people are looking at it because in some senses, I think there's many of the things, I mean, a lot of what he talks about in AI is just total fantasy, and all AI people know that. And I've spoken to people in space. I've met a number of space people, and a lot of what he talks about in space is total fantasy. And when he's talking about Neuralink, a lot of what he's saying is total fantasy. But it's about 20%. 80% of it is actually viable. And what's absolutely extraordinary is he delivers consistently on that 80%. So once might be luck, but he's constantly delivering on this 80%. And he does it with all sorts of techniques that I find from a management perspective abhorrent, but he does it. And Starlink. I find that whole story
about Starlink. Starlink is going to change the world. Eventually, Starlink will change the world. People don't even talk.
What's interesting about that is, my understanding of it, speaking to experts, he wasn't even the first there with that idea.
Never.
That Bezos was much and with the right idea around that, but he's enacted the idea quicker than Blue Origin seems to be able to manage. Blue
Origin flies lower than Alan Shepard, slower than Alan Shepard, and shorter than Alan Shepard. And
they've got the New Glenn, so the New Glenn should go higher. But what's extraordinary is the New Glenn is I think that's I mean, it's like the Falcon Heavy, right?
Yeah, except
so when you look at what's going on with the
Boeing
with Starship, I mean, it's just it's mind blowing, and I don't think people quite get and the actual how advanced the engine is. What's his latest engine?
The Raptor?
Yeah, the Raptor. Yeah. And I think he's a very interesting and difficult character because I disagree with many of the things I say, but he's clearly can create enormous loyalty and vision and do things in extraordinary ways.
Well, it's like I said about Wernher von Braun. The V2 is the V2. Whatever he is, the V2 is.
That story is. I think I really got into watching a lot about SpaceX because I was just trying to check that I got the stories right about von Braun in the ones that are in there in the book. And I just got deeper and deeper into reading about the production of that engine and what that involved. And, let's face it, one of the points I highlight in the book, 10,000 people died in the manufacture of the V2 rocket and about 10,000 people were killed by it. And it's just an extraordinary when you think that the Redstone rocket that then effectively took Shepard into space is sort of the direct derivative. Is it the Redstone?
Yeah.
There's people who know about all these details, but I was just trying to follow the thread through. And so these stories have these stories have this complexity to them.
Hey, so how come you say that I have to get you onto a new topic that you can talk a lot about real quickly, because otherwise you'll just keep talking about the same topic. And so what about, okay, we talked a little bit about this, but so you say, let's get rid of all the software engineers. And I understand why you're saying it. But
it's a provocation. I'm not sure it's in the book, but it's something I like to provoke software engineers with, because what I'm trying to highlight to people is, look, if this technology promises to do anything, then it should be able to replace. If it's going to replace any human, then the first human it could replace is a software engineer. And that leads to a very interesting world, because one of the points I'm making in the book, my spoken stuff tends to be more provocative. In the book, I try to tone down the polemicism and invite the reader in. It's really
I don't know. Talking to you, your book is kind of like just talking to you.
It is. But it's more, I get to revisit and think, oh, I should tone that down, or whatever I think, because the book is totally light. And that's, and it's like when people don't like the book, it's like, they wouldn't like talking to me either. And there's a piece of me that feels, the whole of me feels, I am so excited about that, because I think when I was writing it, I was trying to put a piece of my soul into it. I mean, I'm not religious.
You did.
But I do think of soul as, it captures, in essence, what is the point in writing the damn thing if you're not capturing who you are and how you're trying to say these things? And isn't that what AI teaches us, that we should be celebrating our foibles and our variety? So to write a book that is saying that this is the atomic human, and to not take a whole chunk of yourself, a whole dollop of yourself, and put it into the middle of that book, I just think would have been absurd. So I really do like the fact that people who know me say it captures me. And, when people meet me, they get the sense of me through the book. And what a beautiful thing to be able to do. What a privilege.
Well, the idea of listening to you and reading you is essentially, there is no interface. And that's the whole idea. Why do I have this desktop? It's not a desktop, with folders that aren't folders, with pages that aren't pages.
Yeah. And that's the interaction. So we can get, what the book is, so it's interesting because people read the book and they don't see this message at all, some. And it turns out the thing I didn't know before writing the book, but I suppose isn't that surprising. Some people, I thought, narrative doesn't work for everyone, actually. There are people which narrative doesn't work for, and that can't draw lessons from narrative. So you think it's such a common approach to telling a story and having the lesson emerge from the story. But some people actually don't like that and only want to work by logical argument. So there are messages in the book that some people I know, like quite technical friends, they tell me, they like this bit in the book, but they didn't understand why there are all these stories. And then they start asking me questions that are totally answered in the book. Here's some things I thought of based on the initial ideas in the first chapters. And I'm thinking that's like the whole of chapter 6 is covering that.
Well, even when you were talking to Zubin, great guy. I really like everything he does, but there is a disconnect. I'm sorry. There's a disconnect there because there's a disconnect there.
Well, but Zubin and I have known each other
25 years.
Probably, yeah, a long, long, long time. And actually, I like the fact that we think differently and we see things differently. And the book, the thing that I got excited about when we were able to create a book is I hope that people see different things in it, because then the book is adapting to people in a real sense. And I think the only way I could see that you could do that is through narrative, because it's this difference between showing and telling, right? So I think the reason why I can be more provocative in person in a conversation is because if you disagree, you can come back, right? And you say, no, hang on, it's this, or wait, isn't it more like that? And we can have a conversation, we can explore it. There's a responsiveness, and like there is in that aircraft. But when you've just got this sort of monologue, that's going on in a book, if you're not giving room to responsiveness, in what I hope is happening is it's triggering thoughts in the reader's mind, and it's making them think about the things that they think or how they think about that. And I think to do that, if you're doing that too provocatively, you're not inviting the reader in, you're dividing, and there's too much division in this space. There's too much us and them, right? You want to try and pull people together around this vision for what humanity is or could be.
Well, the thing about the book is, like I said, I'm up to like 15 or 20 of reading these. It's just like reading the books on human consciousness. They all are so sure of themselves. So I asked the authors, if you're also sure of yourselves, which one of you am I supposed to believe? But they're all, and then I suggest, what if this is just a solipsistic universe and only one of us is here? And then that gets them all upset because that would destroy everything they've ever written about. So they just say, oh, that would be a barren wasteland, but it's totally undisprovable. I mean, you could simply...
Yeah, it'd have to be really big, like in some sense, so it's one thing that I come out of, and one thing I sort of say provocatively after finishing the book is, I don't write it in the book, but when I'm giving talks on this, because I have this, because I'm trying to constantly get across the difference in bandwidth, like the fact that it's going 300 million times faster. And so at some point I'm like, oh, what else is slower? If I go slower, what do I find? Oh, if I go like 300, I had to go like 8 billion times slower. So even more slower than us is our ecology. And I just like, oh my goodness, that you realize. So this thought is something like, when people say, well, what surprised you about, that's often a question you get. I think the thing that surprised me is I'm just left with this thing of having written this book, and through just trying this analogy, it was like, oh, if you want to, the analogy being, and I have to choose my words carefully, if you want to get a sense of what a rapid decision-making system, when that rapid decision-making system is looking at a slow decision-making system. So the computer looking at us is roughly equivalent to us watching plants evolve.
Well, E.E. Cummings said that trees are just slow fireworks.
Yeah. And if you were to speed them up, and indeed, as I sort of talk about in the book, when we animate them, they suddenly seem alive. Even if we animate their evolutionary history, they seem alive. And it's because we're just tuned to a particular pace of information consumption, tuned through the process of evolution, because that's what we were given. That's what we inherited from the people that came before us and the animals that came before that. And the thing that gets me on that is, so it's like, okay, so if you want to call these machines intelligent, I'm afraid you have to call the ecology intelligent, because in terms of what's going on, it's just information processing with decisions being made in a complex interacting system. So don't be going around talking about artificial intelligence. And, let's go the whole way. I mean, actually, I haven't read the sort of, what's his name? The Gaia. He died recently, didn't he?
I don't know who.
James Lovelock, is it? Who wrote about this notion of Gaia.
Yeah.
I never really wanted to read those books because they sounded too anthropomorphized for me. But I almost feel now I need to go and read what he was saying. Like I think he's trying to say everything's in balance. Well, it's not in balance. It's changing the whole time. If you were to look at the Earth over millions of years in which this is playing out, it's just like stuff going on. There's no it's constantly dynamic. There's no balance.
Anyway, so I was going to ask you that when you mentioned the speed, bandwidth. So I was thinking of the difference in degree. Well, wait a minute. Is something a difference in degree or difference in kind? So if you're talking about the speed of things, it's a difference in degree. They could all be the same thing. But difference in kind reminds me of how you talk about, well, you do it with both animals and other things. You say, like, is a tree better than a rabbit? Yeah. Or what's the best vehicle? You rode to the talk in your Brompton, but you came from the States in your airplane. Which is the better one? And don't you see how that draws a person in? I mean, how could someone not be drawn in by that?
Well, that's the hope. But the interesting thing is, some of my colleagues are very much like, people have said this before, but I still think that we could get everything. Like the notion of the atomic human, what is left? I think it's just a very powerful idea. People are very obsessed with these counter arguments around you can create intelligence or that it is rankable. But yes, that's the hope, that it makes people think and makes people realize that we are much more interesting than these media stories are giving us credit for. But I do think that the worry I have is we're being debased. We're being debased by so I think before we started, you said, well, how is it you can be optimistic? Well, I think because at some point, there's a realization strikes me that the only hope is to be optimistic, because pessimism is
that's totally that's tautological.
It is tautological, but so much of life is tautological. And this is one of the weird things that you start realizing when you see it's an evolved ecosystem. We're part of a larger ecosystem. The tautologies are everywhere. Like we've gone, in terms of sure, they're not. It's a mechanistic universe that's coming from a set of laws and blah, blah, blah. But from our perspective, in terms of the decisions that you can make, that doesn't count, right? The complexity is so far ahead of you that you end up having to fall back on the tautology, right? Because it is self-fulfilling to go the other way. And sort of if you're not working, the only way we get out of this is by the people working across all fronts, the sort of what Popper calls the piecemeal social engineers, being empowered by this technology and driving forward constantly for a better world. If all of those people believe that world isn't possible, then it's self-fulfilling. The beautiful thing is that just the way we are, it's only a minority of people, a very small minority of people that have to work towards that world because they naturally collaborate. Like the reason why the sort of, the allies could work together in some sense is because they're fighting against something. It's clear what they need to do, right? And that's, and it's an extraordinary thing because you're basically communists on one side, people who have utterly opposing political views. They're all agreed that that's not what they want. And when you're agreed, you don't then have to, you will know independently what to do. You don't need a central coordinating function.
Well, yeah, but if you think the enemy of my enemy is my friend, if you think that's going to get us where you want to go, I don't.
Oh, yeah, I didn't capture that well. The piecemeal social engineer argument is quite different. It's much more that you end up collaborating naturally because you're just independently working towards doing the right thing. But the problem we face at the moment is that the piecemeal social engineers have just been undermined by this technology. So
if a massive asteroid is heading towards Earth and people were smart enough, which they wouldn't be, they would think, oh, there's all those diamonds in it. Let's just wait till it gets here, like that movie, Don't Look Up or whatever it was. But if a massive asteroid was heading here and people were smart enough to say, okay, let's get together as a human race and make sure save.
What do you think the massive asteroid, if it's not the vast agglomerated power of a few companies, which, by the way, it's like I say, not necessarily with evil intent. It's a massive looming threat. The great thing about it, it's even embedded in the founding fathers' vision for the United States to not let companies get out of control because they just experienced the East India Company going bankrupt and having to be taxed on tea in an effort.
Let's see how the Constitution works after next Tuesday.
Well, that's the problem, isn't it? Because the one of the challenges you get, and I think it's a re-emerging system in the United States, is literalism around the Constitution and how that stands up. Because basically we are talking about, and the threats that you're talking about are emerging from this technology, right? They are emerging. Why are the people who are threatening this technology capable of doing it? Because why are the people who are threatening the open society capable of doing it? They're doing it on this technological basis. This is the socio-technical existential threat we're facing. The more pessimistic side of me sort of looks and sort of it just feels like there's going to be dark times ahead, even if my favorite candidate wins the election. I don't think it squashes these problems. These problems are there for a reason. And the answers people are giving at the most senior levels are not addressing those fundamental reasons. And it's that people feel isolated from the mechanisms of politics. the same digital disenfranchisement that we're talking about when I operate with a computer, people feel that about their country. And, whether their reaction to it is right or wrong, and whether it's Brexit or whether it's the sort of rise of a very right-wing extremism in the US, or whether it's German increase in extreme left and extreme right, it's all driven by people feel that the system isn't delivering for them, and that therefore that the system should be smashed. Yeah, and there's really interesting, strong parallels between that and what digital technologies are doing, because they also disempower us in a very
one of the things. Another thing that's compelling in your book and brings you in is the idea of what you say about. You said it earlier a little bit about basically people wake up, they want food for their children, they want to be able to take them to school and feel safe, they want to have health care. And that's what they're looking for. That's their agenda. That's what they want.
And they want a better life for those children, right?
Correct. But that has nothing to do with what we've been talking about. It's like this thing underneath. I mean, we travel the world and everyone we meet is nice. So when I travel, if I go to China, if I go to Morocco, wherever I go, everyone's really nice to me and I'm nice to them.
People are capable of the most horrific evil things and the most extraordinarily inspirational things when they're working together.
Correct.
And the difference between those two worlds is how those people are being convened.
Well, let me ask you this. You're at Google Talks. There's the big Google thing. And the Google started, their motto was, don't be evil. Yeah. Are they not evil?
No, I mean, they're naive. And I think that one of the problems that we face is that it's almost like to get to that position.
You're saying Google is naive.
Naive, yeah, in a very interesting way, because there's
who are you to say that?
They're canny in terms of how you run a business, but naive in terms of the effects that has on society. The genuinely, I think one challenge, I mean, of course, and it's a matter of interpretation, right? Because if you're looking at people and you're constantly assuming that it's coming from ill intent rather than naivety, it's actually quite difficult to fix. So even if it sometimes is ill intent, my feeling is the best approach is to look at it as naivety. And I think the naivety is, I mean, it's one of the things, I didn't say it in the book, but I've said it when talking about the book, and I get picked up on it occasionally. If you look at these large companies and the way they exist in society, the closest description I have for the way that we treat them socially is the way we treat children socially. So in terms of our expectations of them being morally formed individuals, of being able to form fine moral judgments, are just not there. We don't expect them as entities to perform as we might expect someone in our community to perform, in terms of thinking a little bit beyond what their immediate goals are. And this is something we perceive with our children, and we spend a lot of time working with our children, supporting them to learn that the world's a bit more nuanced. And of course, they go through a transition in their brain when they hit puberty, where that nuance kind of develops in really, really interesting ways. And how we bring them up leads to what we look for in society. Well, the reason when we talked at the beginning about all these successful people, they've been able to become successful because when we built markets and systems of capitalism, we've sort of allowed, for good reasons, I mean, it goes all the way back to Mesopotamia, we've said, look, it's not possible to constantly make moral judgments over every decision we're making. If we want to provide something at scale, sometimes we have to have process replace judgment. Sometimes we have to have systems of laws or guidance for how we fire people that don't require us to ask every individual if they're a single mom and engage in that moral behavior. So the ecosystem we have around companies pretty much alleviates some of that moral obligation that we expect not only of each other, but of most of our other institutions. So whether it's the press, or historically we expected it of the press, whether it's our legal institutions, or historically we expected of our legal institutions, these standards of behavior that we expect of these main components of our democracy, just we don't expect of companies at all. And this ends up with this really weird effect where every time they do anything that is considered slightly good, like my favorite example is they open a research center in Africa. They're not actually the people that decide to open it don't actually visit Africa or go and understand what the problems are. They just say that must be a good thing. You know, we all celebrate it. Like, weren't they good for opening a research center in Nairobi? Like, as if they're a child, like as if they did, the one time that they did something moral, then we all have to cheer it to the rafters. I mean, it's
what about the other side of the coin? The prefatory to the Mike Tyson remark, when Microsoft did its thing with the Twitter thing, and in 16 hours it's spewing out homophobic, vitriolic stuff, and they go, well, yeah, we're really sorry. We didn't know this was going to happen. And if we had known it was going to happen, no, we wouldn't have done this. But is there some kind of a moral compass there, or are you giving them a break and saying, you know?
Well, the interesting thing is there were people in that company who knew that was going to happen. I know a bunch of them. There's some extremely moral people within Microsoft, but the company itself does not integrate them into its corporate consciousness in the same way that for a human being, moral behavior is integrated into, to the extent that individuals are moral, the system is integrated into our decision.
Your friends are telling you that they knew this was going to happen. How can the system be so corrupt that these reputable friends of yours?
It's not corrupt. It's the information topography. It's the difficulty of the communication. It's who has the ear of the CEO. Remember, if that voice, when we talk like the Eisenhower illusion in the book, if that voice isn't around the table when that decision is being made, that voice isn't heard. And you know, I think it was more complex. There's a lot to that story that, you know, is from my perspective, is to some extent hearsay, but I'm pretty confident in terms of how things went wrong there. That's just large organizations. They're not
to make it as simple as possible. Make it as simple as possible. Just look at the Challenger explosion, the Challenger disaster. The same exact.
Or look at Boeing. Look at Boeing with the 737 MAX. You know,
that was evil. That was evil to me.
Well, again, evil is challenging because what's happening is that people are incentivized to do the wrong thing. I'm nervous of the term evil, and I don't know all the details of the thing. But what's going on, but particularly, I think what is horrific, and having spent time in Ethiopia and knowing their pride in Air Ethiopia and this sort of response, well, this is only African pilots, or this is only, you know, pilots. I think the other one was Indonesia, that like somehow this is the pilot's fault. I feel evil in that response, but I understand why it's coming, because they're trying to protect their business, because they're not moral agents, right? They're people that have shareholders. And now, of course, the ironic thing is if these companies were to behave, it would be in their longer term interests to be more moral, because these short term negative behaviors, like a child doing these things, don't get you very far in life. And within the ecosystem of companies, they are suffering for it now. But unfortunately, within the ecosystem of how they're incentivized within the period of a CEO's life or whatever else, they're not incentivized to behave in a moral way. Apart from maybe where public opinion is counting, right? So when they're very public facing. So if we go to other things, where the companies don't have public interfaces, it just gets extraordinarily bad. So, you know, the Trafigura affair, which you have to be very careful about sharing because they're so litigious, but just look up Trafigura and what they did. No one's ever heard of them. But if you compare them to the what's the Deepwater Horizon, BP with a public face, enormous fines, et cetera, and then compare what went on with Deepwater Horizon with the Trafigura story, which is less spoken about because they don't have a public face, right? But as a company, they're enormous and very litigious. But just one can go and read the facts for oneself. So the extent to which our ecosystem, so how do we deal with that in practice? Well, we do have regulators, right? We have regulators that are supposed to help and intervene. But the challenge is that the digital topography, as I refer to it, has changed so rapidly, it's undermined the very mechanisms of regulation that we expect to be keeping these entities in check. And again, you know, I'm not anti-tech in general. You know, big tech companies sometimes do very interesting things, but if you want to see where the existential threat's coming from, it's a socio-technical existential threat, and it's coming from those companies. Not even ones, you know, even if we think, you know, like I say, I'm not saying that the leaders of those companies are evil, but the system is producing evil effects.
Hey, when you drink, do you talk more or less than this?
I won't say who because I don't know if he wants me to be quoted, but someone who's quite well known who was having a conversation once. He said, a conversation with you, it reminds me of the only time I took speed.
Yeah, it's like, and this is why the book is so good, because it's just like, your mind is like, it's mine is like that too, but it's not articulate. It's just, all this stuff coming out. You at least have this type of path that you follow, and I can follow it very well, but it's
I try and get back to the path, but and you could say, particularly in our conversations, we go quite wide ranging. There's a lot of extrapolations here. And you might sort of say, well, if you believe that, why do you hang out with people at Google and go and work for Amazon? I was questioned on that. Well, because I don't think it's this is a shared problem. It's like a friend with a difficulty. You're trying to support them through it. We need to support them through it. Turning them into the enemy ain't going to be
but right. You're making this a solvable problem. It's like if you have a friend who's an alcoholic and you go, why don't you just stop drinking? Why don't you just stop gambling? Why can't you just be happy?
Yeah, precisely. Yeah, that's exactly what it's like, and we know, and we basically need some form of societal intervention. But just as we often have to work with friends, when they're in a bad state. But what that looks like is kind of hard. I mean, what's my book doing? It doesn't actually talk about most of this stuff until the epilogue, right? It just mentions it briefly in the epilogue because it's like, but most of my life is dedicated towards building institutions that will help, inviting companies in, trying to work with them. I'm funded by DeepMind, right? They don't. I don't try and get myself in a position where they don't want me, on their premises or whatever else. But that is the same level of awkwardness of when you've got a friend that's a close friend that's got a problem, because the character of what these people are trying to do is inside there somewhere, right? But it's just not coming out in the way that we want it at the moment, right?
How come you didn't decide to just switch things and make a lot of money in your life?
Well, I guess some of the story for that is I don't know. I'm not averse to a little bit of money, but I'm comfortable. But I had two experiences of, which are both sort of mentioned in passing in the book, of watching my dad die and watching my brother die when they know that they're dying. And no one's, when they're dying, sitting there, thinking, wasn't that great? I made a load of money. They're not, even though I think in both cases, they led lives to be proud of. I think that the regrets, and Bezos talks about this regret thing of like that in his 80s, he would regret not having tried to start Amazon. And that's why he left DE Shaw. Well, I don't know what the world's going to look like if I even know that I'm dying when I'm dying. But if I do, I want to be in a world where if I know I'm dying, that I gave it my best shot. I don't think, and I don't mean that, like, I don't want it sounds again quite egotistical. But it's weird as I try and get across in the book. You have these positions in terms of you happen to have made a series of choices that mean that you are an expert in a technology that becomes societally very significant and are aware of issues that need to be addressed. And for me, that leads to a deep sense of obligation to do the best with that luck. I'm not religious, but there's like, oh, well, I'm fortunate in that way. And what do you do with that good fortune? Well, you work your very hardest to support everyone else, not that I can, but and I didn't do, I did work at Amazon. I made enough money to be able to move to Cambridge. I couldn't have afforded to do that. I couldn't have afforded to move from Sheffield to Cambridge without having worked for Amazon. So, I'm not badly off. But there's one thing I realized really early on is you get to a certain level of money and people are just making money for money's sake. They're not like the difference between 50 million and 100 million people who make these kinds of money I don't think it's like, it becomes a purpose in itself rather than, and I think there's more interesting purpose in life. Not, some of them are very nice. And some, I know
find
people.
that as I get older, as I get really old, if someone asked me what would you like for Christmas, I would say, please come to my house and take something away from me. It's like, why would Jeff Bezos, but what is it that prompts someone to say, I think I'll build a $500 million yacht that won't go under the bridge, that the yard that I'm building it in? I mean,
so the yacht's interesting, and I think he's moved along as a person from when I interacted with him, or maybe the person I knew is some sort of combination of the person he was before. And I didn't have lots of, I had interactions with him, but my model for him at the time, which I think was probably had been true and was just fading, was he was someone who loved creating new businesses. So it was before he built the yacht. And he just, all the things I saw from him in Amazon was just a passion to create new businesses. So if you look at the innovation that came out of Amazon across its period there, which is all stopped, right? In terms of Alexa, in terms of Amazon Go, whether these things are working or not, in terms of Prime Air, these are Bezos personally leading projects to try and, which I kind of quite admired about the company in some sense. It's like, within the spirit of how companies are supposed to operate, they were constantly trying to sort of innovate and serve customers. But that works for a consumer organization. That doesn't work for an internet organization like AWS or Alexa, who don't have proper customers. That all starts falling apart. And I'm not saying that he saw that. I certainly felt that. In that I didn't want to work in those organizations because I couldn't say, what do individual customers think about this? Because the individual customers were large companies buying into AWS, or in Alexa, the thing's not even doing anything for anyone. So you can't even understand what the customer.
What about Siri? Jeez.
Well, they're all, I mean, Alexa looked good because it was better than Siri, but actually the more you go on, it's sort of like, well, it hasn't become, it's an amazing idea, amazing realization, hasn't actually become a business. If you look, most of what Bezos was good at doing, he turned things into businesses. But at some point, I think it's very difficult. You become disconnected from what real people are thinking, right? Because it's just the way of it. It's the and then I think it's very difficult to create those businesses. And so he's interested in doing Blue Origin.
But look at. Well, yeah, but he sucks at that. He really sucks at that. I don't want to talk about that because he's done absolutely nothing. The New Glenn will never get off. Boeing will never have another Starliner. Elon Musk is the only road for NASA. He'll end up being the head of NASA when Trump gets elected. All right. Okay. And we can keep talking all day if you want. I'll be glad to. But Steve Jobs. Okay. Steve Jobs was never connected with people. He was building things that, as you know, that people didn't know they wanted. He started all of this.
And a totally different innovation. And I was so lucky. I got to meet people that work closely with Bezos and closely with Jobs. And they thought, from what everyone said, and these are people working really closely with them, like directly with them, that they utterly innovative in utterly different ways. I've not met anyone who's worked so closely with, well, I know people who have, but I've not had a chance to talk to them about it. How Musk does it, I don't know. But what's so interesting is that their approaches were nothing to do with each other. That Bezos, the people that I talk to say that Bezos could pull an idea together and create something from himself that worked. Jobs would always combine things. And then the other interesting thing is when you look at the first Kindle versus you look at the iPod. And there's a really interesting story that is in the Everything Store that I think is probably true, given I don't know this to be true. But the whole Kindle is inspired by the iPod, right? Because Amazon are looking at that and going, well, when books become digital, we lose our whole business, just like music publishers are about to lose their business to the iPod. But what's so interesting about it is the reactions in the character of the companies. That the first Kindle, which actually I kind of like, it has all these keyboards and all this on it. It's totally like, it's like how Bezos thinks a product is, that it's not, he's sort of thinking people want a keyboard. Whereas when it comes to the iPod, Jobs is imposing his view of what the future.
Exactly, which is the view I like. I hate Kindle.
And both of it, and neither thing is right. This comes back to this thing. Neither thing is right. They're different in different circumstances. And
I know it's a tree and a rabbit. It's a car and a Brompton. I understand that. But the thing about, okay, all right. If Steve Jobs was alive, the first thing he would do is fire Tim Cook, because Apple has done absolutely nothing Zero since Steve Jobs died. Zero. They bought.
Well, but then, I don't think
Beats,
Amazon's going to do anything since Bezos left either. I mean, I think that's I think it's,
well,
actually, when I'm sorry, we're all in areas that I'm not really deeply expert in, but when I look at Tim Cook, it's impressive that he keeps the momentum going. I mean, that's something that Steve Ballmer failed to do.
Oh, what an idiot! What an idiot!
But they aren't. They can't. They aren't. They're really impressive, capable people. They're just missing. And I think it's a curse to take over from the CEO founder, isn't it? I mean, sure. You're never going to achieve like they achieved. So actually, on that basis, I think Tim Cook has done extraordinarily well.
Well, no, as far as supply chain, there's probably no one in the world that is better than having alternative supply chains in the event.
The challenges I think you're implying is that they're sort of running out of new ideas.
He has no imagination. He has no.
But it's extremely difficult. Companies.
Tim Cook is not going to make it. There's no Tim Cook that's going to make a dent in the universe.
But in some sense, the weird thing about these CEO founder companies is that they get to combine the magic of the personality of their founder to some extent. They can't express all the nuance with the scale of a large company. But once that's gone forward or something, I don't think that these companies, they can't have their cake and eat it continuously. They just become these large behemoths with all the challenges of bureaucracy that occur in these things. And typically the way they continue to survive is by exploiting dominance in particular markets, which is why they become quite a serious problem for us. And actually, I think Microsoft is the most interesting from a business sense. I mean, I'm really not keen on some of the things Nadella says in terms of what he wants to do with AI, but you have to admit he's done an extraordinary job at reestablishing them in cloud, and very clever moves. If we think about it as a game, very, very clever moves, and that's the problem. Too much thinking about this as a game. This is not a game. This is our lives, and in economics we make it a game. And that has some great consequences because it leads to competition and production, and we get a lot of stuff cheap. But at some point, the game has to stop, and we have to get serious about what sort of future we want.
Yeah, but what are you saying? I mean, okay, I know what the book's for. I know the book is there. As a bookseller, I'm going to say, if you want to know what's going on, if you want to wake up, if you want to understand AI, if you wonder what it is, what it can do, what it will do, what a threat it has, what promise it has, this is the one book you need to read. But if you, having written the book, were out in the street protesting, what would your sign say? This is not a game.
I don't go for protest.
Exclamation point. What is your sign? What is your banner now?
Well, that's the interesting thing is that everything I work for, and the book is just part of that, is building systems and institutions and supporting other people to work their way through that, whether that's educating. Well, I mean, one of the things I do is trustee for AI in education. So trying to support teachers in understanding how they better deploy this technology and supporting them to create institutions that allow them to share that understanding with other teachers. Or another major project we're working with AI at CAM is the flagship mission in Cambridge. And a lot of my thinking has gone into that. And one of the, we're supporting projects and trying to lift people's thinking in terms of their ambitions about what they'd like those projects to address. So one of those projects is about local decision-making in local governments and how we can support that with these technologies and learn what the pitfalls are, but what the potential is, and have people who've used the technology and got good results share how that works with other people in local government. Because these are the sort of this group of piecemeal social engineers. There are other areas we'd like to influence, like health. Health is much harder. But, this technology is so pervasive, you just really have to get out there. I mean, protest isn't going to help anyone, right? But supporting the people who will make a difference, who can make a difference, who need the support, who are not talked about in society, who are not celebrated, even though they're the ones that we rely on because they're teaching our kids or nursing our parents or whatever else they're doing. These are the people that need help and support. And, one thing we can absolutely see is whether it's the startup ecosystem, small companies that are aiming to disrupt big tech, or it's big tech themselves, none of them are addressing this, none of them. And they continually fail to address it. There's a massive mismatch between the supply of solutions they're providing and where the demand is on the ground. Now, that's a macroeconomics, microeconomics mismatch, right?
Yeah.
But the question about how we solve that requires getting into the weeds, understanding how we open up the channels of where these things are trying to connect together, and really getting close to. We've just released today a public dialogues report. We spent 2 days in Liverpool and Cambridge talking with members of the public, what they want out of AI, really engaging at the coalface. The coalface of the people who are trying to provide the solutions, the people who are having the problems, and then trying to translate that into things which become, how do we solve this? How do we deliver solutions? Because academia, although we're being massively disempowered by the conversations going on at the moment, we are the only place that can bring together companies, public sector, hospitals, startups, and start reimagining what this future looks like. And we're not doing a good enough job. We're criticizing companies. Universities are not doing their job. No one is doing their job here. Everyone is failing in their job, right? It's just most obvious in the companies, right? But government is failing. Universities are failing. The way in which society is supposed to operate, in order to deliver this solution, we need to work together. And so what we're trying to do is lead from the front in trying to work out ways that we can improve and do better. Because if Cambridge University can't do it, then what university can do it?
Well, the thing about it is that now that we talked earlier about optimism, and I still, it's just because of my innate fatalism, but it's wonderful that you have the optimism. But what's fascinating about talking to you is that it's clear so many times just by looking at your face and your tone that you are passionate about what you just spoke of. Obviously, comes straight through your face, and you're passionate in the book. How do you ever, and you talked about, and your father and your brother, why do you think you are so passionate about these things? What gives rise to that? Just inherent goodness? What is it?
No, I mean, actually, I do. My mum always said that my dad had a sort of sense of right and wrong, that she always had to think about stuff. I'm not saying whether I inherited that or not, but she always used to say that about him. My brother, well, as the stories tell in the book, he had an inherent sense of supporting the underdog, people who were being bullied. And the interesting thing, and I can't self-analyze, but I did grow up with these two people making a big impression on me. My brother often, we were brothers, we were close in age, so we would scrap. But when it came to being in the outside world, he was always there for me, and he was there for other people who were, and he carried out his career doing that. I don't know that, one of the interesting thing is that, I think this is true for a lot of people when people have close to them who made a big impression on them who die. You're left kind of with this obligation to try and continue the work that they were doing, right? Aren't you? It's sort of.
If you're a good person, you are. If you're a good person, you are. Yeah.
Well, it's like, what is good? But in some sense.
Wait a minute. You don't recognize good or evil?
Well, if you can't recognize evil, it's hard to recognize good, right? That must be true.
Yeah, I
don't recognize them as absolutes, right? It's hard to know what the downstream outcomes of these sort of things is. I mean, sure, you could sit there, we could say, but what if someone did this? That would be evil. Okay, sure, that's evil, right? But in the world of more nuance, where decisions are complex and the right thing to do is not obvious, that's when it gets hard. It is mostly in the cases which people try and simplify. So I think the thing but when they're both gone, they had these different personalities to me. But one thing is, I think you sort of realize, of course, I was closely related to them. So in a sense that they're both within me, instinctively, I can feel them. You tend to differentiate more from them when they're alive, because you're like, well, that's the sort of thing Mark would do. But he's not here to be doing that stuff, right? My dad isn't here to be doing that stuff. So I think that it's oddly, I'm not suggesting anyone goes through it, but it's an extraordinary gift that is coming from, in effect, the previous generation, the people around you. And then you start to extrapolate that. Well, it's not just about my family. What lessons are there in culture? What lessons are there in history? What lessons are there, how do we get through this? And, I think you have to be very careful with it, because people get a bit carried away with themselves in it. And that's very harmful as well. I mean, it's
interesting, because the way you're saying it is the way that story about the guy getting his doctorate in physics, and they asked him one question. You've heard this, why is the sky blue? And he answered, and they said, be more specific. And he answered, and they said, be more specific. And they
Yeah.
asked until they knew everything that he knew. And that's what yeah, I don't know, it was a deductive or inductive that you're talking about one person, your brother, who you obviously loved and who obviously still lives simply because he lives in you. But then you just extrapolated it out to everything.
Yeah. Well, that's what we are. That's us. And the amazing thing is, could a computer ever tell that story? No.
Oh, well, I don't know. I don't know.
But it can write that a human would have written that story, but it can't feel the things it feels. It's not coming from the same place. It's not exposed to the same vulnerabilities. And that's kind of the point that the book is trying to communicate.
How can you be so sure?
Well, because like, even if you simulate it, make it do something, unless you simulate exactly my life experience, which would be an incredibly difficult. You're having to now simulate the whole universe around it. Like someone was saying to me, oh, well, look,
that's what Alan Turing postulated. He made a machine that simulated the entire universe.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, you just end up with, okay, basically we can clone someone, right? And we can bring them up. There's all sorts of things we could do where we're creating artificial life, which is a clone. And now this entity is, approximately human because it knows no different. But if you're just creating a thing that has exactly the same experience as a human does, then there's a really odd question about what are you doing? I mean, you're creating a pet for someone. What's going on? What we are actually creating is an entity that has a very different experience, to the extent you can say it's got experience of the world than ours, because it's operating at a bandwidth that's 300 million times greater than ours. So its perception of what to do, and it is so, to the extent that it has a perception, is totally different from ours. And the point is, it's like, who do you want to be in the driving seat? An entity that is very that has the same vulnerabilities and weaknesses as us, or the machine. Now, of course, no individual, you don't want any individual human to be in the driving seat. But the extraordinary thing about modern society and the open society is how in the open society, we try and combine opinions of many people and make decisions for the wider benefit. Now, it's not the only form of government on the planet. It's a form of government that it looks like it's coming under increasing threat. But the alternative form of government, of autocracy, actually has the same weaknesses as the machine making all the decisions. It's not in touch with its people. And over time, it tends to, that's what Popper's book is about, is how that the only way of going through society without violent revolution all the time is having an open society which assimilates the opinions of people in it. And it's messy. It's not clean, but I think the problem and one of the and trying to make this connection, because it feels much bigger than the book is really about AI and human intelligence, but it does at some point extrapolate into all of that, like you're saying, like it goes beyond us into the culture that comes down from us. And, although I'm not an expert in all these things, it felt important to sort of represent them because they're part of a human intelligence, right?
Well, yeah, that's the thing about the book, is what happens is, just like in your conversation, is I think you're writing something and you think of something. And again, it's generally an analogy.
Yeah.
And that's how your book works. And that's why, again,
and a lot of stuff is thrown out. Here we've just gone wide ranging into things I wouldn't have put into the book, but the book has the chance to be refined because I reread it certainly the first half loads of times. But and then I got to the voice and the style, I just produced it for the second half. And I had a better taste about what to keep out. Whereas in a conversation, there's a lot of stuff. You'll cut all that out later. You'll be responsible for that.
I don't know what the hell I'm going to do.
Give me sound coherent. Coherent to the extent that I can sound coherent.
We'll send it down. Take it down to 5 minutes and 35 seconds.
Where we just say Nazi, evil.
Well, now you've given me this moral obligation, and if I don't do it, but I won't be evil if I don't do it, so that's okay then, I guess.
Well, I think it's words for evil. There are people I don't trust, and one of the most beautiful things between humans is trust, and one of the most beautiful things is, in many situations, even in today's world, that trust is openly shared as a starting point, as a default. And actually, one of the nice things about writing a book, and like you said, it's not like you're in this to make a fortune. when you are in the world of producing books and producing things, and I find this with my editor as well, Keith Mansfield, who is a wonderful support. People have a passion for what a book can do and what a book can do for the good. And that's what they're interested in. And that's because it's an evolved ecosystem. It's because it's been around for a long time. And
and I guess to conclude, because we have to sometime, I would just simply say that, your passion to me is contagious. And, when people come in and want a book on AI, or whether they want it or not, I'm going to say, if you want to read something, this is the book to read. So, you can be grateful. That's not why I'm saying it.
Well, and but what's moving for me, and it has ever since the beginning, when people are saying, what do you expect your book to achieve? Well, the only thing I really like, and I'm glad it has achieved, is it really moves some people. It affects individuals, whether it's going to affect anyone, but the people that it affects, I think, really appreciate it. And what an extraordinary thing to be able to say, when we're talking about whatever else I achieve or don't achieve, or are sort of striving for, or whatever else. I think when it comes to a reflection on things you could have done and didn't do, what an amazing thing to be able to say that there were sort of people you met who was often in important positions, sometimes important in terms of influential, who you wrote something that they really engaged with in some interesting way. And, I can't play musical instruments. I can't sing. I can't do anything else like that. So what a great, it's very nice to hear that. And what a lovely, that's like, what more could you ask for? I mean, yeah, it's a lovely thought.
I mean, what I try to do every day in the bookstores, I like when kids come in. I like the idea that there's a possibility I could change their life. I like the idea of making them laugh. If you and I ran the world, things might be better. Who knows? But it's like pretty much basically what you said about your dad and your brother. You just go on trying to remember how good they were and how you can honor their memory. And it's like, it's really cool because I don't know why it's the same, but it's the same, like when you were talking to him and when you were talking about Eisenhower, I'm starting to tear up, and then I'm thinking, why am I tearing up? What is it why am I tearing up? Because I'm thinking about Eisenhower on the eve of D-Day. What is that?
Yeah. Well, because I think, and the privilege that the book gives me is that actually when I'm talking about, certainly when I'm speaking about it in certain moments, I feel the emotions of the whole thing all over again. And that, what I really like about that is that one of the things that writing and thinking about the book taught me is that feeling those emotions and thinking about those things, not being emotional all the time, but feeling those and understanding those things, and that empathy is a key part of what it is to be a human.
It's interesting that the actual process of it helped define the difference between what you were writing about and who you are. That's tautological, but still it's cool. Yeah.
It's been really great to chat. I have to go to meetings.
I know, I have stuff to do too.
But thanks so much for your passion on the book reading as well, and everything you're doing with the bookstore.
I'll send you a picture of the books in the window.
That would be really great.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of The Avid Reader. If you liked today's episode, check out more of our content on our channel.